Let us incorporate the principles of our religion into the complexion of our minds, that what we attribute to God as his moral excellencies and perfections, we may propose to ourselves as matter of practice and imitation, and that what is our best employment in this world and will be our only employment in the next may be our free choice and our transcendent pleasure. Welcome to episode 4 of Encounters with King's College Chapel. Our guest today is Gillian Tett, who's the Provost of King's. Gillian took up her post in October 2023, and she came to us from the world of financial journalism. She remains a columnist with the Financial Times, and she's often commenting on the radio and the television on economics and politics, not least on the economics and politics of the United States in the new Trump era. Like my earlier guest, John Rutter, Gillian was a student at Clare College, Cambridge, literally in the shadow of this awesome chapel, and her PhD was in social anthropology. I was delighted that Gillian found time in her incredibly busy schedule to pop across from the Provost Lodge where she lives and share an encounter with this extraordinary chapel. Gillian, it's a lovely November morning when you've come to talk to me in the chapel. Front court looks amazing, doesn't it?
It certainly does. I mean, beautiful grass with all the constant sound of lawnmowers, though they stopped just now. Very cold, but beautiful low sunlight. And I think that really brings out the chapel to its best advantage.
Let's pop inside then and see how it feels and looks in there this lovely morning.
Well, the lawnmower is back, but that's part of the fabric of the college. So the reason we have such lovely grass. And I must say, walking into the chapel, it never gets old. Every time I walk in, my heart stops for a second as I look up at the extraordinary ceilings that everyone is so impressed by. But for me, it's really the way that the chapel's light changes throughout the course of the day and the seasons, because sometimes you have sunlight streaming through, a bit like today. Other times, there's almost no light at all, and then you get the evening light when suddenly you get this burst in the setting sun coming through the western windows. And then at night time, it's completely different all over again. At night time, it really is Hogwarts, because you've got these extraordinary shadows created by all of the candles. It's just extraordinary. I sometimes think that the chapel's a bit like a tapestry of light, woven of all the threads inside all the stained glass windows. And it constantly changes each day.
It's beautiful, isn't it? And that's a really lovely way of putting it, I think, in terms of a tapestry. I've not thought of it or heard it described that way before.
Absolutely. And the reason I use tapestry is because I imagine that all of the craftsmen, all of the provosts, and all the different kings each wove a few threads into this tapestry over time. And the tapestry changes. And you can't wipe out the beginning of the tapestry. It's there, it's permanent. But each new generation weaves some more threads and changes the overall complexion. But when it comes to the stained glass windows, I mean, they really are just such a multitude and a kaleidoscope of different colours and shifting shadows and light.
It's lovely when the light comes through the windows and you see the colours against the stonework. That's a particular feature when the sun is low in the sky, as it is through the winter.
Absolutely, and that's one of the great joys of the British winter. There aren't many joys of British winter. One of them is the fact you get this lovely low sunlight.
And actually, as we're standing here now, this won't come across, but the light is changing. Can you feel it? I think a cloud has moved slightly, so the shadows are a bit sharper and the brightness is really coming out. Just look over there.
Absolutely, it changes. Again, the other image that sometimes comes into my mind is that of a river, which is constantly moving and reflecting light and changing, and no two instants are ever the same with a river. And in some ways it's like that with a chapel, as the light changes constantly throughout the season and day.
Chapel as river, I like that. And the connection between river and time is beautiful. It's in a hymn, of course, time like an ever-rolling stream. Lovely image. Now, Gillian, as we stand at the front here, I wanted to remember with you the first time I ever heard you speak in chapel, actually, and that was Matriculation Day 2 years ago. and all our new students were sat on the red chairs, and here you were, just arrived, standing talking to them. And I remember distinctly your address, actually, because it had a helpful mnemonic in it. And you asked them to think of the word CAM, C-A-M, and as I recollect, the message was around focusing on curiosity, not being afraid to be ambitious, but at the same time is looking after yourself, particularly in terms of mental health. First of all, have I got that right? And
Absolutely.
how would you expand it?
Well, my training of years of being a journalist and having to give a lot of speeches taught me to always try and use some catchy acronym to remember what you're trying to say. So I remember standing up here on my very first day looking at the students who looked about as terrified as I was feeling coming in here for the first time, and trying to really just offer a few ideas about how they could navigate Cambridge, drawn from my own experience. And CAM, obviously very easy to remember, in my mind stood for collide with the unexpected and be curious, admire ambition and applaud ambition, and make time for your mental health. So that was my way of trying to give them a bit of advice. I'm sure they forgot it all. They're probably too busy sitting there being nervous and looking at each other and trying to work out who they would be friends with. But at least it helped me remember the speech, if nothing else.
Well, a bit me as well. I mean, I remember at least some of it, and I felt, a great affinity with the first one, curiosity. I think that's a fundamental value and an important thing here. And one of the things we celebrate here, isn't it, is when people do curiosity-based research, really just delving into the questions. And sometimes that's the way to get the most exciting new discoveries.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm a huge believer in the idea that one of the great strengths of the college is that you're basically putting people from all different disciplines into close quarters and jammed together, a bit like a chemistry experiment where you're taking ambitious molecules from all parts of the periodic table, applying pressure and seeing how they collide with each other. And that's often when the best scholarship and ideas and creativity comes. So trying to encourage the students, who some of them think they've come up to read X subject and they're going to stay in that lane, to have the courage to jump out of that lane and collide with each other and talk is part of the joy of being a student, I think, and a researcher.
Absolutely. So the college are kind of an arena for multiple multidisciplinary collisions.
Absolutely.
All of which conducted politely and constructively.
Yes, one hopes anyway.
Yeah, most of which, yes. Yeah, good. Shall we go through the screen now? Because if we go through the screen, I don't know if you know this, but when Henry set down his will and design for the place, even at that point, the idea was that the central screen, although it was described as a rood screen then, would be 14 feet deep.
Wow.
Massively deep. I'm sure you imagine there'd be a cross on top of it rather than an organ, but it's a big statement within the middle of the chapel, a real division, isn't it?
It really is quite extraordinary. And as an anthropologist, and my PhD was in cultural anthropology, I spent a lot of time thinking about boundaries and space and liminality. Liminus means actually refers to a door in Latin. And it means that when you go from one place to another place, you go through a door, which is very important culturally. And this particular door and this arch is extraordinary. And the reason why we welcome the new graduates standing on the steps next to the arch is because after I've spoken to them, they then walk through the arch symbolically, and they conduct a little ceremony where they say the founding statement that really defines the whole college, given by King Henry VIII. They say that, they pledge to uphold it, and then they go and sign the book. And the very act of walking through an arch is meant to symbolize them having a new life, or a new chapter of their life. And the same principle is also used again when we actually welcome new fellows into the college, that there's a ceremony which again makes them feel like they're coming into this new special sacred space.
And actually one of the things that happens is that it's one of the rare occasions when we close those doors to make the distinction all the more clear. And of course built into the screen pretty much is the Provost stall, which we're going to go up to now. So
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like one of the luckiest people in the world because I'm basically sitting in a seat created by Henry VIII. And all of my horrible histories, reading about the history of the Tudors and all of my past O-level history lessons never prepared me for the feeling of literally sitting in Henry VIII's seat. And there's two things I absolutely love about this, or three things. One is that I'm up high, and so I can see the entire chapel in one go. And sometimes I feel a bit sad that I'm a bit cut off from other people, but actually the fact I can see everything is extraordinary. The other thing I love is that just in front of my seat, there's a very old prayer book with all kinds of things. I can't quite work out what it actually
It's
said
huge
exactly.
and leather bound, isn't it?
And it's dark brown. It says on the front something about Annus Domus 1722, which I used to think meant it was created in 1722. But when you open it up, you actually see on one of the pages early on, and I think this is the original paper, that it was printed in 1715. And this very old paper with old print and old English style of writing, which frankly it's quite hard to read, in red and black, and these extraordinary pictures as well. It's quite remarkable.
So what it is, it's a book of common prayer. It begins with the act for the uniformity of common prayer. And although, as you said, some of the lettering is surprising to modern eyes, so all the S's look like F's, it's pretty much a book of common prayer. But as we go through it, we realise that it's got some additions that are very relevant to the early 18th century. Now, is this one? Some of these have got a service for remembering gunpowder treason.
Really?
Yeah.
Ha! Amazing.
So I'll see if oh yeah, there we are. For the prayer and thanksgiving for the 5th day of November.
Wow! I had no idea.
There
Extraordinary.
you find some pretty hair-raising stuff. It's page 28.
I wrote a column about gunpowder and treason the other day. For the happy deliverance of King James I and the 3 estates of England from the most traitorous and bloody intended massacre by gunpowder, and also for the happy arrival of His late Majesty on this day for the deliverance of our church and nation. So basically they're celebrating the fact that Guy Fawkes failed.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's literally called, at the top of the page, is gunpowder treason. So this is much more exciting than any number of GCSE history lessons, I must say. And one of the things I love doing is bringing in friends from America and showing them this book, and which is literally just lies out in front of my stall and saying this book is older than America.
The book is older than America, yes, yeah. Well, let's now move out of the stall, and I want to walk with you up to the very east end of the chapel, up the central aisle. And as we do this, maybe both our minds will go back to that amazing day, about 15 months ago, I suppose, when I was leading you up and your brother was supporting you, I think.
Absolutely. Well, I'm one of the very lucky people who was able to get married in the chapel. And I never dreamt for a minute, to be honest, I was ever going to get married, because I got married for the first time at the age of 57. And I certainly wouldn't have imagined I was going to get married somewhere as extraordinary as this. But I was lucky enough to meet my husband about 3 or 4 years ago. And he suggested, actually, that it would be amazing to get married in here if we could. We didn't know if we could. It turned out that I was the first provost to get married in the chapel, we think, because historically most of the provosts were either not able to be married in the first couple of centuries, that was banned, and then when they were allowed to be married, they basically were married before they arrived here, for the most part, it seems. But we had to go down to the Archbishop's office in London and get special permission for that, and then we got married in here, which was extraordinary.
So it was the day after the end of services in July, so it was a Monday, wasn't it? Monday evening, 5 o'clock. The place was full. All your friends from all over the place, and your family around you at this end. I mean, how did it feel to draw these worlds together?
Well, and also a lot of the college community came along as well, which was very touching, very moving. It was extraordinary because one simultaneously, in the role of provost and also a human being, and also somebody trying to get married to the person you love. And trying to juggle all these different roles at one time is hard. I had quite a lot of reflection, if not panic, about what to wear, because I thought, well, I can't really, I need to dress up properly. It's an extraordinary building. I'm not someone who likes shopping. In fact, I hate shopping. I'm not somebody who would ever normally wear a big white dress at all. Last person in the world to look like a meringue. And of course, if you're getting married in your middle age, then you don't really want to start looking like a Disney princess either. So trying to work out what I could wear that would be significantly, serious and credible and have the status, but also make sure that at the end of the day it was a wedding. So in the end I found something, but not after a lot of heartache.
And you were happy with it?
Yes, I was, yes.
And Henrik was happy with it.
Yes, that's the most important thing. My husband,
Good.
Henrik, was very happy with it. But I do remember kneeling in front of this and trying to remember what the service was all about. The one great blessing I had was that I walked up and down this extraordinary aisle so many times that I have learned to do that to some degree.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
First few times I had to walk up and down the aisle, I made plenty of mistakes, not least because I didn't realise that there's so much echo and such good acoustics here that you have to have rubber shoes with rubber soles. Otherwise, you go click, 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 click in ladies' heels.
So actually, it might just be worth recalling the occasions when you do walk the length of the chapel during the course of our services. I think there are fundamentally three occasions. There are two concerning flowers. These are the two occasions when we remember Henry VI. And you explain what you do then.
Well, for the founders' service, we basically put flowers on the altar to commemorate Henry VI. We had someone from Eton and someone from King's, obviously, and we provide lilies and roses on those days. Again, when we welcome the new choristers, when we say goodbye to the new choristers.
Oh yes, you come to the middle then.
To the front. Then for remembrance service, I come up the front as well.
With the
side chapel.
Yes, all the way into the memorial chapel.
So on all those occasions, I have to remember not to wear normal shoes because otherwise I literally walk up going click, 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 do the sounds and feel somewhat embarrassed.
Well, we're going to walk the other way now. So,
like you say, that's one of the things that, I don't think many male provosts have that kind of problem because they don't wear high-heeled, clacky shoes.
Not as far as we know.
Yes, well, I now have a line in rubber-soled shoes, so that's free.
Much. Thanks.
The other thing I learned to that occasion is that the gowns have these kind of side sleeves which have lots of material sewn into them with gaps, and I can stash throat lozenges for when I have to do readings, because sometimes I've been up and had to do a reading and I've suddenly got a tickle in my throat, and having a throat lozenge basically in the sleeve of my gown means I can at least manage to make sure I don't start coughing or squeaking too much.
The whole business of voice management is very familiar one to me, because we do these occasions not when we feel good. We do them when they come round in the calendar.
I spent years of my life having to perform on stages and on television because I've been a journalist many years. So I'm used to giving speeches and performing on TV under a great pressure. But nothing prepares you for a chapel like this.
I mean, you used the word terrified earlier, I think, about the students and anyone new coming here. It is awe-inspiring, at least this place. But I tell you one of the things I really love about it. I love it that it's still part of a contemporary institute of higher education with an admissions policy which has always been very progressive and positive. And the opportunity we have to bring students in here, certainly they're terrified when they come in the first instance. By the time they're graduating, they kind of adjusted to it, felt, yes, I'm the sort of person who can be at home in here. And those who learn to read in the chapel learn something very special, because just to be able to stand there and not confidently, but humbly and positively project your voice into this space, and to know that there are hundreds of people hearing you reading the text, usually a biblical one, that's a huge step into confidence, I feel, for young people. I've really loved all the occasions when I've been able to help people do that.
That's a lovely way of putting it, because the reality is that we're not just giving people an intellectual education, we're giving them a cultural and social education as well, and teaching them to have the confidence, to have agency, and to have the ability to enter places that might seem alien. And they don't have to become part of them, but they also don't have to hate on them because they're separate. It's a way of accepting that there are these symbols and rituals and places of power and history which anybody can have access to in Britain, no matter where you come from, in Britain or anywhere around the world. And you need to embrace that and accept it and find a way to navigate it, even if you don't necessarily want to be part of the establishment. And so I'm very struck by, the difference, as you say, between the students when they first arrive, they walk in here, many of them think, this is not me at all, I don't belong here. And yet somehow we have 3 or 4 years to persuade them that they do belong, and it's part of their shared history.
Yeah, and I can completely relate to that personally as well. As you know, I'm coming towards the end of my time as dean here, and I was chaplain for 5 years in the 1990s, but when I first started the job, I was utterly terrified and I couldn't understand why I was here. I had a vague sense that the people who had appointed me thought I would get on well with the students. I think that was the idea, but I also had to get on well in the chapel, and just didn't feel at home at all. But now, of course, I do feel reasonably at home, but it is really an incredibly important educational journey. It's part of what we do as an institution to kind of normalize the exceptionalism of this for the benefit of people's confidence, curiosity, and what they will contribute later in life as they go beyond.
Yeah, I hope that any student who comes here is then going to be well equipped to go forth and be themselves and, exude confidence in a law court, in an operating theatre, in a company boardroom, in a government office, or in any other environment they find themselves in.
Exactly, in a local council chamber, in the House of Commons, somewhere where they need to just find out a way of speaking the truth with integrity. This will have helped them on that journey. Now, we've actually arrived in a side chapel. This is the side chapel which in 1924 was dedicated to Benjamin Whichcote, who was a provost, as you know, in the 17th century. And one of the things that we discovered about each other this summer was that we're both big fans of Benjamin Whichcote. But can I let you tell you the story of your relationship with him, because it's really special.
Well, the very first morning I woke up in the Provost Lodge. It's a quite historic building, not as old as the chapel, but still pretty old, and it's surrounded by history, so I feel I'm literally swimming in history every day. So the lodge is full of lots of beautiful art, and some of it's quite modern, some of it's quite old. And as it happens, just on the corridor where the bedrooms are, there are various portraits of previous provosts, which can either be seen as an inspiration or a warning or a rather humbling reminder that I'm just one in a long line of people who've had this role. And the very first morning I woke up in the Provost Lodge, I went outside the bedroom, looked at a portrait on the wall, and it said Benjamin Whichcote, who was 19th Provost. It's quite a dark, gloomy portrait, and he doesn't look terribly empathetic. He looks like, my very worst nightmare of a headmaster, very grumpy. And I looked at him and I thought, yikes, what on earth am I doing here? Because I felt nothing in common with Benjamin Whichcote. And
that's what greeted you in the morning.
Yes, and I sort of went, yikes. And then the next day I thought, actually, I need to do a bit of research and find out who he actually was, because he sort of stood there looking at me. So I did some research, I Googled him and discovered that he'd been the provost partly during the time of Oliver Cromwell. And one of the things he'd done was to save a large part of the Jewish population of the day in England. And the reason was that he was recorded in the history books as being someone who was very tolerant and interested in other people's ideas, which in those days was quite unusual. And to be honest, I hadn't dug much more into why he was tolerant until quite recently I heard the Dean give a really remarkable sermon about Benjamin Whichcote and realized there was a much bigger story behind this, which is that essentially he had been raised, like most people, to assume that the only source of knowledge and truth came from God. And that was an era when it was very common to have divine inspiration as being the fount of all knowledge. And that's exactly why we have the chapel in the centre of the college, because until the 16th century or so, 17th century, it was assumed that learning was all about God and chapels and churches, and that was the only source of truth. But as I understand it from the Dean, in fact, then what happened was that Whichcote became fascinated by the learnings of scholars looking at the ancient Greek cultures, which had very much emphasized the role of human reason in looking for knowledge. And so Whichcote essentially decided that there were two sources of knowledge. There was God and human reason. And the simple act of embracing a sense of plurality meant that he was forced to recognize a really important point, which is that people are rarely entirely right just by themselves. Actually, debate and dialogue and diversity of opinions can be a really powerful thing. And from that, there begins to be a culture of tolerance and curiosity and sometimes even humility, which led him, I presume, to then become tolerant enough to try and say that actually the Jewish population should not be killed, but should be embraced or tolerated.
He's a real figure in my imagination about the history of this college, precisely because of that commitment to understanding that you can get to truth by more than one way. The revelation way, but then saying no, reason isn't a contradiction of that, it goes alongside. Now, obviously, it creates a few issues, but that's where the life is, in the issues. But he also exemplified that, not only in his tolerance and his wisdom in running the college and holding it together at very difficult times, but also in his own learning. And I think what I'd like to do, I quoted this in the address I gave to the non-resident members, and then you quoted it, didn't you, to our incoming students as well. Let me just read this, if that's okay. And though he had a most profound and well-poised judgment, yet he was, of all the men I ever knew, the most patient to hear others differ from him, and the most easy to be convinced when good reason was offered, and, which is seldom seen, more apt to be favourable to another man's reason than his own. Studious and inquisitive men commonly at such an age, say 40 or 50 at the utmost, have fixed and settled their judgments in most points, and, as it were, made their last understanding, supposing that they have thought or read or heard all that can be said on all sides of things. And after that they grow positive. And then it says this, positive and impatient of contradiction, thinking it a disparagement to them to alter their judgment. But this is the beautiful line. But our deceased friend, Benjamin Whichcote, was so wise as to be willing to learn to the last, knowing that no man can grow wiser without changing his mind.
Which actually, I think, is a beautiful passage. And the fact I heard you say that really takes us back to where we started, which is the joys of colliding with the unexpected and being curious. Because when I heard you give that sermon, I didn't expect you to talk about Benjamin Whichcote, but suddenly I collided with your research that you'd done and realized why that portrait was hanging next to my bedroom in the lodge. But in many ways, Whichcote's whole approach to life was all about embracing curiosity and collisions and being able at any age to say, there's more to learn, there's more to discover, there's more to collide with, and maybe I've been wrong. And by golly, did they need that in the 17th century, and by golly, do we need it today? Because we live in a world where there's growing sense of dogmatism, of polarization, people not listening to each other, or not even just having the courage to listen to a different point of view. But here we are standing in Whichcote's chapel right now, or side chapel, and what he said back then is as relevant today as it was in those days.
I found it really interesting to walk around the chapel with Gillian. Obviously, we've been in the chapel on many occasions together, and we take part in the same ceremonies and services and so on. But just to take a little time to step back and look at the building, I mean, it was really nice the way in which she described it as a river and as a tapestry of lights at the beginning. And to reflect with her a little bit on the way in which the chapel is, well, as we all know, a famous church, place of music, but also absolutely integral to an institute of higher education, a place where people are reading for degrees in sort of every subject under the sun, a place where there are academics working at their research, where there are PhD students, junior researchers, senior researchers, scientists, economists, anthropologists, historians of art, psychologists, people in mathematics. This is our community, and for different reasons and at different times we gather in the chapel, sometimes very rarely on our own, often in an act of hospitality, asking other people to join us and to enjoy the space and use it for its purposes of religion and music together. But I think the most interesting part of the conversation for me was the bit that happened towards the end when we slipped into the Whichcote Chapel and talked about Benjamin Whichcote, that provost in the 17th century, who was here at terribly turbulent times and seemed to take a fairly relaxed approach, actually, thinking to himself, well, yes, we must be religious, we must understand that truth is revealed to us, but on the other hand, there's quite a lot to be said for reason as well. And opening that door, which has both reason and religion in conversation with each other. And as transpired in the conversation, once that fundamental collision happens, the whole of intellectual life begins to explode. we can become wiser, more diverse in our interests, and I hope intellectually humble as well, recognizing that we've got a grasp on the truth, but there are other people who see the world differently and prioritize differently who've got a grasp on the truth as well. It's just different for them. And we must live in this world of multiple truths at the same time as realizing that there's a huge difference between truth and falsehood. So that, for me, was a way in which the chapel and the intellectual life of the college really came together. And I'm delighted that the conversation with our provost, with Gillian, led us in that direction. It was, to use one of her words, it was a kind of collision with the unexpected.